Hey, stop me if you've heard this one before. But Texas ain't won the Big 12 since 2009. Woo! Yeah. I know. But guess what? They're winning it this year. Happy 4th of July, dummies. Yep, good morning, and it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also, in 2 edition of that as well. Hey, Texas man, run out and get you one of these shirts. Go ahead and get you one of these shirts. We'll see you next year. But this is about this year, a preview and game-by-game prediction for the 2023 Texas Longhorns. And yes, Uncle Lou is high on the Texas Longhorns this year. I've been catching hell for it all off-season long. I try to keep a lot of my predictions a secret until I do these prediction videos, but the cat's been out of the bag on me with Texas for a while. I've been saying on the call-in shows for months now that I'm going with Texas to win the Big 12. I don't care about 2009. I don't care about 7-5 or 8-5 or 8-4, whatever they were last year. I don't even care about losing to Kansas a couple of years ago. Okay, maybe I care about that a little, but yeah, so to sort of put the cart before the horse here, I think Texas is winning the Big 12 this year. Now, in this video, I'm going to give you a preview of Texas. We'll talk about the coaching situation. We'll wrap up last year a little bit, talk about the coaching situation, take a look at Texas's offense and defense, who's returning, who did they lose, how they've been recruiting, how they do in the transfer portal, look at some numbers heading into the season. And then I'm going to put Texas' schedule up on the screen for 2023, and I'm going to go through it game by game and give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, as most of you are aware by now, I'm sure, I get these teams from my Patreon page. I have a Patreon page, and every year around this time, I make a post over there. It's the first post on the page right now, if you go over there, talking about these prediction videos. And then everybody that is a member over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page leaves a comment with a team that they want to see me do one of these prediction videos for. I've done, I think, 8 or 9 or so of them already. I'll put a list up on the screen. These are the teams I've done already. So if you're curious about my thoughts on any of those teams, you can click back, or there's a playlist you can click on and scroll through and check out my thoughts on any of those teams. But I go to that Patreon page, I scroll through the list where everybody has left comments of what team it is they want me to do. I pick one out and I do the video. I'm going to try to do about 40 or 50 of these before the season starts. I'm going to keep them going up until about the middle of August is probably when we'll call it quits and start focusing on the season, which starts towards the end of August. So shout out to Brandon W., Agent Z, and Christopher T. The 3 of them left a comment over on the Patreon page that they wanted to see a Texas preview and prediction, so that's what we're going to do today. I really appreciate you guys helping to support the channel over there on the Patreon page. Thank you, Brandon, Agent Z, and Christopher. That support on the Patreon page means a lot to me. I really, really appreciate it. If you want to check out the Uncle Lou Patreon page, there's a link in the description of this video that will take you there. All right, here we go. We're going to get into the Texas Longhorns. Make sure you're hitting that thumbs up if you hadn't already. That's a big help to the video. It's literally the easiest, simplest thing you can do to help me out. So if you're enjoying these preview and prediction videos, which take me a long time to research and make, I would appreciate you hitting that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. We do live shows year-round. I have a call-in show every Tuesday and Thursday night. Make sure you're checking that out. Become a part of the community. All right, the Texas Longhorns and head coach Steve Sarkisian entering his 3rd year as head coach in Austin. Started in 2021. Did not start off great. That's an understatement, obviously. 5-7 in his first year. 8-5 last year, though, so an obvious step in the right direction, which we're going to talk a little bit about here in just a second, and looking to capitalize on that in 2023. This is really the year that Texas, and look, there's going to be, they say this every year. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere that has predicted Texas to win the Big 12 every year. I don't know of any individual person who has predicted Texas to win the Big 12 every single year. So the whole they say that every year deal, Texas fans say it every year. Now, there's no question about it. I mean, Texas fans have been back since they barely beat a terrible Georgia team in the 2018 Sugar Bowl. And what's his name? Sam Ehlinger or whatever his name, and humiliated himself with the whole weird back routine he gave at the 50-yard line after that game. But anyway, the idea that every single college football personality has been saying Texas is back every year for forever is just not true. Oklahoma has been the pick to win the Big 12 more times than not. So this idea that, well, they say Texas is going to win it every year and they don't, I don't know exactly who they is when people say that, but no, the majority of people have not been picking Texas to win the Big 12 every single year. I am picking them to win the Big 12 this year, and I think more than any other year, if they don't win the Big 12 this year, it will be the biggest disappointment of a season that Texas has had since 2009 when they last won the Big 12 title. They're the most experienced team in the Big 12 in terms of returning talent and production. It's Steve Sarkisian's third year there, so you don't have like the new head coach excuse or learning a new system excuse or anything like that. They've got a returning QB, so you don't have that as an excuse. They've recruited great the last 2 or 3 seasons. The roster is loaded with talent. They've got a top 5 offensive line in the country, in my opinion. They've got a top 3 wide receiver room, I think. Running back is an obvious question mark heading into the season. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But Sarkisian is set up to have a really, really good year in Texas last year in the Big 12. Of course, Texas and Oklahoma making the jump to the SEC for the 2024 season. So this is the last season for Texas and OU both. Texas and OU both in the Big 12. Let's take a look at some numbers for Texas heading into the season. I like to do this for every single team. We'll run through this pretty quick, but where do I have Texas ranked? Like every other idiot with a internet connection, I put out my own off-season rankings every single year. I only put 3 out. I do one after the signing days in February. I do one after the spring practices in April. That's my most recent ranking. And then I update my preseason ranking one final time around the beginning of August. So we haven't got there yet. So, these rankings could change when I update them in August. But right now, I've got Texas ranked 13 in my ranking. As far as nationally, where most people have Texas slotted entering the 2023 season, I looked up about 10 different offseason polls or rankings. I looked up some of the bigger ones, that ESPN puts out, or Fox Sports, to some of the smaller ones like Saturday Down South, 24/7 Sports, all those kinds of On 3. Pretty much everywhere you look, Texas is in the 10 to 15 range. There are a few polls that have Texas inside the top 10. I even found one poll that had Texas, I think 17. But the majority of the rankings you find for Texas right now have them in that 10 to 15 range. I've got them at 13, like I mentioned. How many games is Texas expected to win in 2023? Well, Vegas puts out a win number, right? This is for people to bet on, people that like to gamble on sports or college football. So they put out a win number for every single team, and you can either bet above that number or below that number based on whether or not you think that team is going to win more than that number of games or less than that number of games. This is a regular season win total, by the way, so 12 games. This isn't accounting for any potential conference championship games, bowl games, playoffs, anything like that. It's 12-game regular season. They've got the win total at Texas at 9.5. So, if you think Texas is going to have a really good year, clearly you'd bet the over, meaning you think they're going to win more than 9.5 games, which would be 10-2 or better. If you think Texas is going to stumble again, you'd bet the under 9.5, which means basically you think Texas is going to go 9-3 or worse. So this is just a pretty good indication of what the betting public feels about teams heading into a season. So 9.5 wins is kind of the expected win total for Texas heading into 2023, 9-10 wins. Heisman Trophy candidates for Texas this year, of course, quarterback Quinn Ewers. He returns. He is he's the Texas player with the best odds to win the Heisman. In fact, he's got really good odds to win the Heisman. He's sitting at plus 1,200, which puts him 4th on the Heisman list, actually tied for 3rd with Jaden Daniels. Him and Jaden Daniels both plus 1,200 odds. Of course, you've got the two ahead of them are last year's Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams at Southern Cal, who returns this year, and Florida State quarterback Jordan Travis. Both of those two players have better odds to win the Heisman than Quinn Ewers, but Quinn Ewers and Jaden Daniels are tied for 3rd on that list at plus 1,200. What about the odds to win the Big 12, right? To me, this is the benchmark for Texas in 2023. Anything short of winning the Big 12 for Texas this season, to me, is a massive failure and disappointment in their last year in the Big 12, getting ready to head into the SEC. And I think it would be important, for obvious reasons, if Texas could win the Big 12 this year to provide some momentum and some confidence to kind of springboard them into the SEC where they start next year. The odds for Texas to win the Big 12, they're actually the favorite. They are the betting favorite. The odds are plus 120. That's 3 times as good of odds as the second place team, which is Oklahoma. Oklahoma has the second best odds at plus 350. K-State has the third best odds at plus 450. So Texas is the overwhelming betting favorite to win the Big 12 at plus 120. Their odds are 3 times greater than Oklahoma. And what about a national championship? Now, obviously, Texas is a storied program with fans from coast to coast, and I know they want to win a national championship every single year. I don't think Texas needs to win a national title this year in order to necessarily prove anything or for Sarkisian to prove anything. Like I said, the benchmark to me for Texas this year is winning the Big 12. Anything short of that, I think, is a failure and a disappointment. If they do that and only that, I think that's a good season. Anything they accomplish beyond a Big 12 title, I think would be overachieving at this point. But the odds for Texas to win a national title, plus 2,200. They have top 10 odds. That puts them 9th. So only 8 teams in the country right now have better odds to win a national title than the Longhorns. Clemson is right ahead of them at plus 1,800. And Penn State is right behind them at 2,500. So Texas with the 9th best odds, plus 2,200. Clemson ahead of them at 8th. Penn State right behind them at 10th. Again, that doesn't mean any one of those teams is better than the other. This is just how the betting public feels about these teams' chances of winning a national title. So if you're a Texas fan, whatever you think Penn State and Clemson's chances are of winning a national title, that's what the betting public feels about Texas' chance to win a national title. So that's why I like to mention the teams that are ranked or slotted right around Texas there with the national title odds. All right, let's get into it. Now, of course, Texas famously has not won the Big 12 since 2009. They've yet to make a college football playoff. They did have the New Year's Six Bowl win in 2018 against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, which is a good win for Texas. They haven't even made the Big 12 title game but one time since the Big 12 reinstated. The Big 12 went a while where they didn't have a title game. They reinstated it, I believe it was 2017 when the Big 12 reinstated the conference championship game. Texas has only even made the conference championship game one time. That was that 2018 season. And they, of course, lost to Oklahoma. So not only has Texas not won the Big 12 since 2009, in most years, they're not even the second best team in the Big 12. So it has been kind of a down period for Texas over the last 12 to 13 years, going back to 2009. They've had sort of a rotation of coaches that haven't worked out. Most recently, Tom Herman. Now, he wasn't terrible. I think his last year there, he went 7-3. But again, that was the COVID year. So 7-3, not terrible in the COVID year. He was 8-5 before that. Won 10 games his second year there. So he wasn't terrible. But like every other Texas coach since Mac Brown, Charlie Strong, Tom Herman, and now Steve Sarkisian, just not able to get over that hump, really. Again, no playoff berths for Texas. Playoffs have been around since 2014. That would have been an interesting bet to make back in 2014. Will Texas make the playoffs or not over the next 10 years? If you'd have made that bet in 2014, you'd have made yourself some money. But Sarkisian is back for his third year. Like I mentioned, 5-7 his first year, 8-5 last year, and looking to improve on that heading into 2023. Recruiting. Texas has been knocking it out of the park in recruiting. Again, this is one of the reasons why it's so disappointing that Texas has not won the Big 12 since 2009. Obviously, it's disappointing just because Texas is such a big brand, right? But when you look at the recruiting and the talent that Texas has had during that time period, the fact that they've been unable to even win the Big 12 one time is just really unacceptable. The last 2 or 3 years in particular, the recruiting, they're just knocking it out of the park with Sarkisian there. I wrote some of these numbers down, but they were third in recruiting in the most recent recruiting cycle that ended for this year. So the 23 class, they were third in the country in recruiting. The year before that, in 2022, they were 5th in the country in recruiting. That's back-to-back top 5 classes. And then even going back to 21, they were 15th. Talent-wise, according to 24/7, Texas has the 6th most talented roster in the country. That was actually for last season. They haven't updated their talent rankings yet for this season because you still got some movement going on within the portal and things like that. But the point is, Texas is going to be one of the 10 most talented teams in the country, probably one of the most 5 talented teams in the country. And generally speaking, that's been the case. Again, which is one of the reasons it makes it so hard to understand why they haven't managed to win the Big 12 even once since 2009. Let's take a look at the offense and the defense, see who's coming back, who they lost, all that kind of thing, and what Texas might look like once they take the field here in 2023. 85%. Texas returns 85% of their offensive production from last year. That's a huge number. That is a huge number, especially when you consider the fact that they lost Bijan Robinson, who was probably their best player last year, right? All kinds of yards, all kinds of touchdowns, a great player, the first running back taken in the NFL draft. We all know how great he was. You lose him, you still have 85% of your total production from last year coming back on offense. 15 starters total return for Texas, 9 on offense. 9, including all 5 offensive linemen. So Texas may have a step back in terms of talent and production at the running back position, at least in terms of one-to-one, right? There's no running back on Texas roster that's going to give them what Bijan Robinson gave them last year. There's not. They got a true freshman that I really like. Talk about in a second. But I think as a whole, Texas's rushing numbers as a whole could be better than last year's. Returning all 5 offensive linemen off a pretty good offensive line last year. I think I mentioned at the top of the video, but I think Texas has one of the best 5 offensive lines in the country and a ton of experience. They've got an All-American left tackle. I mean, just a really, really good offensive line. That's going to help some of those young running backs. But starts with the quarterback position, and of course, that's Quinn Ewers, right? He returns, battled some injuries last year, looked really, really good at times, looked like a first-year starter at times, which is what he was, a first-year starter. I expect a big improvement from Quinn Ewers from last year to this year. And that's saying a lot because he was not bad last year. He was good. Like I said, in fact, some games he was really, really good. I expect Quinn Ewers to play a lot more consistently good in 2023 than we saw in 2022. So if you go back to 2022 and you take sort of the best of Quinn Ewers, I think we'll see that best more often in 2023 than we saw it in 2022. And he's going to have one of the best groups of wide receivers in the country to throw the ball to. I think you can make an argument that Texas has the second best wide receiver room in the country behind Ohio State. Southern Cal is going to have a great group of wide receivers. There's a handful of other teams I would put in the top 5. Texas is absolutely loaded with experienced NFL players at the wide receiver position. Xavier Worthy, right? Whittington, A.D. Mitchell, who they got through the transfer portal from Georgia. Isaiah Nair, who didn't even play last year. One of the biggest transfer portal signings of your offseason, last offseason, right? It came from Wyoming. Tore his ACL, unable to play. That's 4 NFL wide receivers that Texas has the ability to put on the field at the same time if they choose to. Defenses are going to have a hard time shutting down all of those options simultaneously. Even some of the teams with the better defensive back groups in the country are going to have a hard time slowing down this passing game of Texas, especially if Quinn Ewers takes the step forward that I expect him to take. Offensive line, we talked about that, returns all 5 starters. All Big 12 tight end. I mean, they're absolutely loaded offensively. The only question anybody should have about Texas offensively is going to be at the running back position. So when you take a look at the running back room in Texas, they got a couple of names that are coming back that had some, substantial playing time already last year and in their careers. You've got Jonathan Brooks and you've got, is it Keelan Robinson? I might be saying that name. I might be saying that name wrong. Keelan Robinson is a senior. He's got 660 yards, not last year, in his career. Jonathan Brooks, about 350 yards in his career. So again, these are not Bijan Robinson level talents. Now, these aren't bad running backs. And again, I think Texas is going to look to make up the numbers they lost from Bijan Robinson with like a committee type approach. So I expect both of these guys to play some. Again, none of these people are Bijan Robinson. And if a Texas fan is expecting one of these guys to be Bijan Robinson, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. The closest thing, in my opinion, on Texas roster to Bijan Robinson, and this is purely potential, we don't know yet because he's never played, but C.J. Baxter, the true freshman. I believe he was the number 1 ranked freshman running back in last year's class. He gets to Texas, and generally speaking, you don't like to play a lot of true freshmen, and honestly, the better you recruit overall over extended periods of time, the less likely it becomes that you ever have to rely on that many true freshmen. But a running back is a position that can play as a true freshman. Maybe there's certain situations where the learning curve is a little steeper, picking up pass protections on third downs and things like that. But in terms of running a toss sweep or a handoff off tackle, things like that, most freshman running backs are able to come in and pick that up right away. So I do think we'll see a lot of C.J. Baxter this year. They also moved a wide receiver where they're just absolutely loaded. They moved a kid from wide receiver to running back. I'm be curious to see how they use him, but Savion Red, I think, was his name. Anyway, so they've got a lot of options at the running back position. I think C.J. Baxter is the most talented of the bunch, but he's a true freshman. We'll see how long it takes him to kind of get going this season. We all know, which we're going to talk about in a second, Texas has that huge matchup coming week 2 against Alabama, but so not a lot of time for freshmen or anybody really to get their feet wet before that game. But I think Texas's running back room is okay. Again, there's not a Bijan Robinson level player on this team right now. I don't think any one of these players is going to replace what Bijan Robinson gave Texas, but the combination of 5 returning offensive linemen and I think a pretty good rotation of running backs, I think Texas from a team rushing perspective can come close to the numbers they had last year, and the passing game should be just miles better. All right, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball for Texas. Now, they don't return quite as many starters on the defensive side of the ball as they do on offense. They return about half the starters, 6 or 7 starters. It's getting hard to figure out anymore in college football exactly who's a starter and who's not, because, you know, defenses run different formations. So, you know, depending on who you're playing, you may be running nickel the first play of the game, and that's going to be one set of starters as opposed to maybe the week before you ran a lot of 4-3, whatever the case. Offense, too. You know, is the first play of the game 1 running back and 3 wide receivers? Or is it 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, and 2 tight ends? And so technically, who's the starters? But Texas loses about 5 or 6 starters / major contributors off of last year's defense. So about half the defense gone. They led the nation in quarterback pressures last year, and they get a lot of that production back along the defensive front. 2 defensive tackles, Sweat and Murphy, they both return. Obviously, one more year of experience for those 2. They should be improved over what we saw last year. Defensive end, Baron Sorrell, I believe is his name, is back too. So you got a lot of returning talent and experience along the defensive front. And of course, middle linebacker Jalen Ford. Now, this is an impressive stat line. Listen to this stat line here. 119 tackles. That's really good. 10 tackles for loss from a middle linebacker. That's really good. 4 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. This guy does it all. He's really, really good. He's back, probably the best of the bunch at linebacker for Texas. DBs, one of the most veteran defensive back units in the country, loaded with juniors and seniors. You bring in some transfers from Arkansas and Wake Forest for kind of a depth perspective, nickel and dime type situations. But cornerbacks, safeties, your nickel corner, one of the best in America. Texas's defensive backfield is going to be really, really good. Overall, Texas's defense, I think, is going to play better in 2023 than it did in 2022. And if Texas wants to get where they want to go, I think that's one of the areas where the improvement has to happen. The passing game, I think, needs to improve a little bit too offensively. Obviously, they ran the ball great with Bijan Robinson last year. Quinn Ewers has all the talent in the world offensively. He's a future NFL player. We already talked about that wide receiver room. If Texas's defense can improve a little bit and that passing game can kind of come along, Texas is going to be a very dangerous team in 2023. All right, let's put the schedule up on the screen. We're going to go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, there it is. Get you a look at Texas' schedule there. Some just sort of general things that stick out to me about the schedule overall real quick before we start to go through it game by game. Obviously, the Big 12 plays a 9-game conference schedule. Now, up until this year, it's been a round robin. There's been 10 teams in the Big 12. You play 9 conference games. That means you play every other team in the conference every year, right? Clearly, that's not the case this year. Texas and Oklahoma, who are leaving the conference next year, are still in the Big 12 this year, and they've added 4 additional teams. So the Big 12, try to keep up here because this gets confusing. The Big 12 has had 10 teams for a long time. This year and this year only, they're going to have 14 teams because they've, of course, added 4 new teams. Next year, Texas and Oklahoma are leaving, and the Big 12 will actually have 12 teams. Unbelievable. So from 10 last year, 14 this year, 12 next year. That, of course, could change if we have any more movement, realignment, conference expansion, or contraction, or anything like that in the world of college football. But as it stands now, there's going to be 12 teams in the Big 12 in 2024, but 14 this year, meaning you cannot play a round robin. So you're going to play 9 teams. You're not going to play the other. You're not going to play the other 4, right? So pretty good draw here for Texas, I think, in my opinion. Let's start with the 4 new teams that are entering the Big 12. You've got Central Florida, UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, and Houston. Texas plays BYU and Houston. I actually think the two best teams of the four are Cincinnati and Central Florida. So you play two of the new four teams, and I think you play the worst of the four. I like Central Florida and Cincinnati both a little bit better in 2023 than I do Houston and BYU. So I think you get a pretty good draw there. The other thing I like to look at when I'm just sort of generally glancing over a schedule in the beginning is where are the tough road games this year? Obviously, at Alabama, that stands out. We don't even really have to mention that. It's so obvious. But more specifically, the conference road games that could be a problem. I don't think at Baylor's very difficult of a game. At Houston, again, brand new team. I think Texas way better. At TCU and at Iowa State. Now, to me, this is a tough back-to-back road game scenario here. TCU, of course, a playoff team last year. 12-0 in the regular season before losing to K-State in the Big 12 title game. They do lose a couple of key pieces off of that team, but I like the coaching staff. I don't expect TCU to just fall off the face of the earth. I don't think they're getting back to the playoffs. In fact, I don't even think they're as good as Texas, but I do think they're a legitimate top 25 team. You have to play them there, and then the very next week on the road at Iowa State. Iowa State's not ranked in very many polls, if any, heading into the season, but the Big 12 man tells me constantly on the internet that it's really, really tough to play on the road at Iowa State. So I do think that's a tough sort of back-to-back road game environment. The rivalry game, of course, Oklahoma, neutral site game like it is every year. You have your bye week after the Oklahoma game. If I was a Texas fan, I'd rather have my bye week before the Oklahoma game, but in any case, you get it after. So that's just kind of a brief rundown of what I think about the schedule overall. Let's go through it game by game. I'll give you some winners and losers. In the non-con, you play Rice at home, Wyoming at home, and then sandwiched in between there, of course, is the big game on the road at Alabama. I think Texas will beat Rice no problem. JT Daniels, the quarterback at Rice. God, that guy's been around forever. Southern Cal way back in, 2018? Spent a year or two at Georgia, then moved on to West Virginia. That didn't work out. Now he's at Rice. This has to be his last year of eligibility. But, yeah, quarterback JT Daniels for Rice. Texas hosts Rice in week 1. Texas should win that game, no problem. Wyoming, same thing, week 3, home game. This is a game Texas has to win. Wyoming, some decent players from there. You got one of them. In fact, Isaiah Nair was with them a couple of years ago, but Wyoming's got no business competing with Texas. Should win those 2 games without a problem. And then, of course, there's the week 2 game on the road at Alabama, which is one of, if not the biggest non-con games in all of college football this season. You've got Notre Dame, Ohio State, which I think will be a big game. But this is on the top of a lot of people's list here, on a lot of people's radar here. This was a great game last year, played in Austin, came down to the end. Alabama sort of pulled it out there at the end. A lot of people think Texas could have and maybe should have won that game, but you didn't, which is kind of a theme from last year. All of Texas's losses last year were by 7 points or less. The Alabama game, of course, by 1 point, but the rest of them were by 7 points or less. So Texas, if Texas even turns a couple of those close losses into wins this year, then you can see how they could easily go from 7 or 8 wins to 9, 10 or more wins. But anyway, specifically, let's get to this game on the road at Alabama. I think it's a benefit for Texas this year that they have this game early in the year. Alabama is a team I think that's going to get better as the season goes along. We talked about all the returning production and talent and experience that Texas has pretty much everywhere on both sides of the ball. Alabama's missing that in a lot of key places, right? Of course, they lost their quarterback, Bryce Young, a former Heisman winner, top 5 pick in the NFL draft. And they don't have anybody on that roster that comes anywhere close to giving them what Bryce Young gave them. In fact, Alabama's quarterback situation is really a mess. It's so bad they had to go out and get Tyler Buckner from Notre Dame after the spring game. So they go through spring practice with Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson. The coaches were so disappointed with what they saw, they went out and got Tyler Buckner. Now, I don't know who's going to end up starting at quarterback for Alabama. I'm leaning either, but it's probably going to be either Tyler Buckner or Jalen Milroe. I'm leaning more towards Milroe, but we'll see. But the point is, no matter who it is, it's a huge drop-off from what Alabama had last year at that quarterback position. In fact, if you remember, and you probably do if you're a Texas fan, without Bryce Young, there's no way Texas wins or Alabama wins that game last year. That drive he had at the end of the game was unbelievable. And he single-handedly won a lot of games for Alabama last year. The Texas game was one of them. But Alabama's going to be breaking in a lot of new players. Their best player offensively is probably a true freshman running back, Justice Haynes. How far along is he at week 2 in the season? Now, I do think Alabama's going to have a really good offensive line, probably the best offensive line they've had in 2 or 3 seasons loaded with NFL players and All-American players, a really good offensive line. But they don't have a wide receiver that can catch the ball. They led the planet in drop passes last year. Unless they've got some younger guys that step up or the returning guys get drastically better at the wide receiver position, there's not really anybody on that wide receiver room who scares you. There's definitely no Jamison Williams or Mechie or Calvin Ridley or Julio Jones or Devontae Smith or Waddle or Ruggs. I mean, Alabama had an amazing run of wide receivers. They're nowhere to be found right now in Tuscaloosa. Defensively, they lose their best player, Will Anderson, although, again, they're loaded defensively. I mean, we talked about Texas recruiting. You know about Alabama's recruiting. They've been either first, second, or third in the recruiting rankings every single year since 2009. They're just completely loaded everywhere. But some question marks. In fact, more question marks, I think, about Alabama heading into 2023 than any season since Nick Saban got there. Just a lot of key pieces gone. They lose, of course, Bryce Young, like I mentioned. They lose their best offensive weapon, Jahmyr Gibbs. They lost their tight end, who was really their only reliable receiving target last season. And, of course, they lose Will Anderson. The defense is going to be good. The offense is going to be good as far as talent goes. How does the quarterback situation work out at Alabama, and how quickly can some of those new pieces kind of get up to speed there at Alabama? I think that's going to be the difference in this game. I can't pick Alabama to win this game. To me, outside of the fact that, well, it's Alabama and, well, it's Nick Saban, I'm having a hard time finding any reasons to pick Alabama to win a lot of their games this year. Texas is a legitimate top 10 team. I think you can make the argument that, you know, they might be top 5 type team. They've got to win some of the close games they've been losing. I think that starts early in the season on the road at Alabama. Texas wins. You're 3-0. Then you start your conference schedule on the road at Baylor. Baylor was disappointing last year after putting together a pretty good season the year before. They may be a little bit better this year. I don't consider Baylor that difficult of a place to play. I think it's good that Alabama is sandwiched between those two group of 5 teams. That's going to be a big win if you pull it off against Bama. It's nice that you get to play Wyoming the following week instead of Baylor, right? Yeah, you don't want to, party too long after the Alabama win and then get a loss on the road at Baylor. Wyoming is sort of a buffer there. I think Texas goes on the road and gets a win at Baylor. Come back home, play Kansas. Kansas is an interesting team because they return a lot of talent too. And if you remember, Kansas started out the season last year red hot. Some injuries kind of bit them around the middle of the season. And, obviously everybody wants to avoid injuries, but when you're a team like Kansas that just can't recruit with the big boys, injuries affect teams like that exponentially more than they do a team like Texas or Bama or Georgia or Ohio State, whose backups are future NFL players, right? At Kansas, that's just not the case. Injuries caught up with them midseason, and it kind of all came apart there. I think Kansas will be a decent team again this year. I don't think they're finishing last in the Big 12, I'll tell you that. But they ain't got no business beating Texas. I think at home you handle the Jayhawks no problem. And then you've got the big rivalry game against Oklahoma. And I hope Texas fans, from this point forward, Texas fans should not mention 49-0. Not when talking about Oklahoma, not when talking to Oklahoma fans, not when leaving comments on internet sections. Fans don't play the game, I get that, but that was an outlier. Now, I think you're going to win this game. I think you're going to beat Oklahoma. I just think you're better than Oklahoma. You're further along you're further along, right? Sarkisian, 3rd year, 4th year, whatever it is now. 3rd year, I guess. 21, 22, 23, yeah, 3rd year. Brent Venables going into only his 2nd year, and it was just a complete mess last year for Oklahoma. I don't expect Texas to show up and win this game 49-0 like they did last year, but I do expect Texas to show up and win this game. Oklahoma's not going to want to lose this 2 in a row. Brent Venables is not going to want to start 0-2 against Texas. He's just not. This is going to be a tough, close game, I think. I think Texas pulls it out, though, and gets the 2nd win in a row over their rival, Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's still a year or 2 away. I like Jackson Arnold, but I don't think he's going to play much this year, and that defense needs another year or 2, I think, before it looks anything remotely close to what Brent Venables wants. Oklahoma's defense was horrendous last year. We're kind of used to seeing Oklahoma have a bad defense because of what Lincoln Riley did to it, but when they brought Brent Venables in, the hope was at an all-time high there, and their defense was just pitiful. They give up 40 points last year or more in half their games or something, just absolutely atrocious. I think it'll be a little bit better this year. Not good enough, though. Texas wins again. Then you get your bye week, and then you got back-to-back games against two of the new kids on the block in the Big 12. On the road at Houston and home against BYU. I think you're going to win on the road at Houston, and I think you're going to win at home against BYU, but I think BYU is the tougher of these two games, even though it's a home game. BYU fields a team full of 24 and 25-year-olds. People like to tell me all the time that the only reason Georgia won a national title last year is because Stetson Bennett was 25 years old. Well, that's the average age of BYU. A lot of their players go and do these 2 and 3 year missions off on Mars or wherever it is they go. And so they're 21-year-old freshmen, 24, 25-year-old seniors. BYU's a grown man team. They play physical football along the lines of scrimmage. This could be a tough, sort of tricky game, I think, for Texas, but I think Texas wins it to remain undefeated. And then the game with Kansas State. Now, if you ask me right now, I already told you at the top of the video, I think Texas is winning the Big 12. So a lot of what I'm saying through this schedule is probably not that big of a surprise to you. But if you were to ask me right now to tell you who I think the best 3, 4, 5 teams are in the Big 12 in no particular order, obviously I think Texas is winning it. But after that, in no particular order, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and TCU. I think those are the 4 next best teams in the Big 12. You play them all. You play them all. You played Oklahoma, got you win in there. But here you are at home against Kansas State. You follow that up with a trip to TCU. Texas Tech. Did I even name Texas Tech? Or you got to put Texas Tech on. The Texas Tech might be the second best team in the Big 12, actually. You might be playing Texas Tech back-to-back weeks. Anyway, the back half of this schedule is not easy. Really starting with the Oklahoma game. I think the Oklahoma game could be challenging. I think potentially the BYU game could be a trip-up game. I think the Kansas State game could be challenging. On the road at TCU, challenging. Iowa State, tough place to play. Texas Tech, I think, might be the second best team in the Big 12. This is a tough stretch here to close out the season. I think you beat Houston. I think you beat BYU. I even think you beat Kansas State at home. Now, here's where things get interesting for me. I think Texas is going to lose one of these last 3 games, but only one. I think Texas is going 11-1. Which of these 3 games do I think Texas is going to lose? I'm going to say the least likely of the 3, Iowa State. I think TCU and Texas Tech are both better teams than Iowa State, but I think this Iowa State game sort of being in the middle, the second half of a back-to-back road trip scenario, on the road at TCU, on the road at Iowa State. I think you beat TCU on the road. I think you go to Ames, Iowa, and catch a loss. I think you come back home and beat Texas Tech. Texas will be in the Big 12 title game playing probably Texas Tech again, maybe K-State. We'll see. I've got Texas at 11-1, a win over Bama, a win over your rival Oklahoma, and a loss on the road at Iowa State. The Texas Longhorns go 11-1 in 2023. Make sure you let me know down below exactly how dumb I am. I feel stupid even saying Texas is going 11-1, but I've been beating the drum all offseason. Now that it's time to do my official predictions, I'm not about to change my mind. Texas, 11-1, makes it to the Big 12 title game, and I think probably ends up winning it. I don't do conference championship game predictions in the offseason because you never know which 2 teams are going to be there, so I don't really predict that, although I do think Texas is winning the Big 12, though. Potential playoff team in 2023, Texas Longhorns. Charge your batteries up in your wireless keyboard and let me know down below.